In this video, we're going to discuss some of the methods that you can use to program the list control in a UX component. So you can see here in this sample component we have two list components, one called list source and one called list target, and initially both lists are empty. So we're going to first click a button here to add some sample data to the list. So we go ahead there and click the button, and there's the sample data. We can delete all the sample data and then go back and add it in again. We can also add additional rows at the current location. So let's go there and click this to add two new sample rows to the current list. We can delete rows. So let's go and delete the current row. So this is going to go just and delete rows. Then we can also transfer rows from the source to the target. So you can see that as we click the button, the row is moved from the source to the target, and we can move data from the target back into the source. And when you move the data gets moved at the current location in the target grid. So if I select Francis Higgins and then go and choose Ken King is going to be inserted after Francis Higgins. Then I can go and move all the data out at once or move all the data in at once. I can also then, once I've got this data in the target row here, I can move this selected row up or down. I can move it to the top and I can move it to the bottom. I can also delete all the rows from there. Let's go back and then select them again. And then I can do an AJAX callback that submits the contents of the list. So if I click this button right now, we're going to go ahead and do an AJAX callback. And that tells me that there were 7 rows in the list. And this message here was computed server-side by XBasic, and then this is just an alert that is being sent back. And there's the data in the list that was submitted. So if I go there and remove a couple of rows and then submit, you can see now there were 3 rows of data that was submitted, and here is the data that was actually submitted. And then lastly, let's click this button over here, which opens up a window with a little form inside it, and I can go here and type in, say, Fred Frankel Newton, and then click OK, and then that row will be added at the current selection. So there's a lot of stuff going on here showing different methods of the list control at work. So let's go back now to the builder and look at each one of these methods in a little bit more detail. So we'll go back now to our builder over here. So so here we are in the builder, and now first let's examine the button that adds the sample data. So if we go and look at the button to add sample data to the list, we can see that that's just calling a JavaScript function called populate list. So let's go now to the populate list function and examine that function. So we can see here that the first thing that this function does is get a pointer to the list object. So we use the standard method of the UX component called getControl, and that's the name of the list control that we're trying to get a pointer to. So you can see there's its name called list source over there. So once we have a pointer to the list source, we can then go and create an arbitrary JSON, an array of JSON objects to populate the list. So you can see that the list had 3 columns: first name, last name, and city. So here's our array of JSON data, and this is the sample data that we're going to use to populate the list. And then we call the lists append rows method, passing in the sample data, and then we set focus to the first row in the list. So remember that the row IDs are 0 based, so this is going to give focus to the first row in the list. So when we go ahead now and run it and then press the button, the sample data has been added and we've given focus to the first row of the list. So let's pause now and then continue our discussion of the various methods. So we're continuing our discussion now on various list methods. So now let's look at the method that inserts data at the current location. So I'm going to go there and select row 3, which is actually the row index of 2, because remember it's 0 based, and then I'm going to click insert sample data. So I'm going to insert 2 rows of additional data after Francis Higgins. So there's Michael Gorby and Eddie Barlow have been added after Francis Higgins. So let's go take a look now at that insert method. So if we go back to our controls, we can see that the insert button is calling a function called insert at current location. So we'll go back to our JavaScript now, and insert at current location simply basically takes creates an array of data that we want to insert, and then calls the insert data function. So here's our insert data function. This function takes the ID of the list that we would like to insert data into, and then the array of data. So here we go and we get a pointer to the list control that we'd like to program against. And now we set a flag that indicates whether we're going to be doing an append or an insert. So if there is no data in the list, so the data in the list is inside a property called RData, which is the row data, and if that array has a length of 0, then there is no data in the list, so we're going to be doing an append. Otherwise, what we need to do is look to see whether the last currently selected row in the list is the last row in the list. If it is, we're going to do an append. Otherwise, we're going to be doing an insert. So I'll come back and describe this code in a moment. But you can see here that if the flag is set to append, then we're going to do an append. Otherwise, we're going to do an insert at the current location row over there, and then we're going to set the target to give focus to the last row that was inserted. So here's the tricky stuff. So the list object dot selection is an array of selected row numbers. So in this case, this list had been set to only allow one row at a time to be selected, but you can set the row to allow multiple rows to be selected. And if you do select multiple rows, then what you're going to get back is an array. So what we want to do is create a new array that is distinct from this array. So we don't want to point it to this array, we want to create a brand new array. So we use this little JavaScript trick over here by creating an empty array and then calling the concat method of that empty array to append the data from this array. So now we have a new array called row, and this array here is disassociated from this array, so we can sort this array and pop this array, etc., without worrying about messing up the list at all. So now we have an array of selected rows. We sort them so that the data is in the selection is sorted correctly, and we do that because when you select items in the list, if you select multiple items, you can select row 4 first and then say row 2. So we want the array to be in sorted order, and then we get the last value in the array by calling the pop method, and then we add 1 to that. So that gives us the target row number where we're going to be appending. But if that target row number is greater or equal to the existing length of data, then we want to do an append. So this fairly complex JavaScript code here allows us to decide whether we're going to be doing an append or an insert. But the command that does an append, as you see here, is append rows, and here's the command that does an insert. So either way, we're adding new rows into the list at the current location. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion now on the list methods, And let's go back now to the list, add some sample data. And now let's look at how the delete current selection button works. So you can see when I delete the current selection, we remove the current row and then give focus to the row underneath that, and if there's no row underneath that, then we give focus to the previous row. So let's go back now and look at controls, and if we look at delete current selection and then go to the click here, we can see that there's actually a method called list remove selected rows, and that method is actually available in Action JavaScript. So instead of writing this code by hand, we could just as easily have gone to Action JavaScript here and then add a new method, choose the UX component, go to list control actions. The action that we'd like to do is remove selected rows from a list, and the list that we'd like to remove from is the list source over there. And if we go view JavaScript, there's the exact same JavaScript that we had initially written by hand. So there's how to remove the current selected rows from the list. Here the next method is delete all rows, and again we could have done that using Action JavaScript. So let's go back there, go to list control actions, choose the action which is remove all rows from list, and then select the list source over there, save that, and actually if we go back to view JavaScript, we see there's the action, the script has been written for us over there. And then add record is slightly more complex. If we look at the add record button over here, we see that it is executing a Action JavaScript method called show container window. So if we edit that, we can see that the container window is called container2. So let's go look for container2 over here. So here we can see, here's container2. It's a window, so you can see that it's a container that has a subtype of window, and inside this container window we have controls called first name, last name, city, and then a button that's OK and cancel. So the actual properties of this window are set here by giving focus to the window container entry in the list and then going to window properties. So you can see here we've given this window an explicit name called add record, and we've turned off the close button over there. But the reason that we gave the window an explicit name called add record is we want to use the get window method and the window hide method to close the window after it's been opened. So you can see here this get window method and window hide method are described here, but in order to use these methods we need to give the window an explicit name rather than the default name of default window, which would be suggested when you initially create the pop-up window. So then let's go take a look at the first we'll look at the cancel button here, and we can see that the cancel button is getting appointed to the window using the get window method, and then just hiding the method, hiding the window, which of course closes it down. But if we look at the OK button, which is going to actually add the data, you can see that what we're calling is a JavaScript function that we've written here called add record, and then we close the window down. So let's go take a look now at this add record function. So we go to JavaScript here and then go to the add record function. So what we see here is that we're reading the value out of those three controls, first name, last name, and city. So we have now three variables called fname, lname, and city. Then we construct a JavaScript object called underbar D, and we set this object's properties. So we now have an object underbar D that has these three properties. So let's pause now and continue in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion on list methods. So we now have our JSON object here that has first name, last name, and city. But if you look at this previous code here, you can see that when we use an append or insert rows method, we actually pass in an array of JSON objects. So we need to put this object here in an array. So we create an empty array called A, and then we push this object onto the array. So here's our list ID, which is list source, and then we just call this function called insert data, which we previously discussed, and we pass in the ID of the list and the data that we want to insert into the list. So this is the function that actually adds the data to the list after the user has filled in that pop-up window. So let's go back now and look at some of the other methods. So after we have populated the list with sample data, we can move selected rows into the target list and move them out of the target list. We can also move all rows in and all rows out. So let's go take a look at how that was done. So there's the button that adds in the selected row. So if we go here to the click event, we can see that this has actually been done through Action JavaScript. And if we look at the action here, we can see that the action is move selected rows from one list to another list. The list ID for the first list is list source, and the target list here is target list. And then if we just go view the JavaScript, we can see that this is calling a method of the UX component called list move current selection, and there's the source list name and there's the target list name. So you can see it's obviously very easy to just move data from one list to the other list. The assumption, of course, is that both lists have the same structure for the data that they're displaying. So then if we go look at the next button, which is move all records, we can see here again that this is done through Action JavaScript, and this time it's move all records from one list to another list. So that's just one of the items in the list of available actions. And again, our source and target lists are specified, list source and list target. So this is our button to move all rows. Now these two buttons, which deselect the selected row or deselect all rows, are identical to these first two buttons here, the only difference being that the source and target rows have been swapped around. So finally, we just need to discuss the actions that move the data in the target list up and down. So we can see here this is going to move the row up and down, and I'm going to go here and shift click to select two rows now, and then if I move down, you can see both rows are moving up and down. So again, these buttons, the ones that move up and down, were also done through Action JavaScript. So you can see if we go to our click event here, we can see that again we're using Action JavaScript, and this time we've chosen the action called shift position of selected rows, and then we've chosen the list ID that we want to reference, and then we've chosen a shift direction, top, up, down, or bottom. So this code to actually move the selected rows up and down in the list is obviously very easy, because you just need to choose an action from Action JavaScript. So finally, the final button that we need to discuss is this button here that submits the data from the list. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion now on the list control methods, and now we're going to talk about how the button that submits the data to the server operates. So you can see now if I click the button, it tells me that there were 3 rows in the table, and the data is John, Frida, and Francis. If I go and move Frida out and then hit the submit button, you can see the data is John and Francis. So let's go and take a look at what happens when we press that button. So here's our submit button over here, and if we go look at it, we can see that what we're doing in this button is getting a pointer to the target list, and then we're reading the current data in the list by looking at the list object's underbar R data property. So the list object has a property called underbar data, which is the original data that you placed into the list, but underbar R data is the current list data, if which takes into account the fact that you might have done a client-side sort or something like that on the list. So underbar R data is the actual array of data that's currently in the list. So what we're going to do is convert that array into a JSON object by using Alpha 5's built-in toJSON method. So this is one of the functions in the Alpha 5 JavaScript library. Then what we're going to do is URL encode this data in case there are any unsafe URL characters, and we're going to create a query string called data that has list data as the parameter name, and then list data as the values. So underbar list data is the parameter name, and then list data is the value. And then we're going to do an AJAX callback. We're going to specify that the XBasic function that handles this callback is going to be called submit data. And then in the additional data that's going to get submitted, along with this callback, we're going to submit data here, and which is this JavaScript variable that was created over here. So data is going to have a variable called underbar list data, and that's going to contain the JSON version of the list data. So let's go now and actually debug into this XBasic function. So here we go. We'll just put a debug1 in this XBasic function, and then go ahead and run it and debug into it. So I'll go there and select some data, and now I'll add 2 rows to my target list, and then go ahead now and press the submit button. So if we look at E, we can see that this is what gets passed into the XBasic function. We can see that one of the variables passed into this, one of the variables inside E is the list data. And if we just go ahead and actually click on that, we can see here that let's close that down. There's the list data, and you can see it's in a JSON format. So there's the square bracket, then the curly bracket. So list data is a JSON object that got passed back from the browser. But if we look at the JSON object, we can see that one of the properties in the JSON object is star key, which means that it's not going to be a valid XBasic variable name. So what we want to do is go here and do an stri tran on the list data, and we want to change star key into a valid XBasic variable name. So there's underbar key value. So then we go and we call the JSON parse function to parse the list data, and that gives us an XBasic dot variable called p, which is going to be in the form of an array. So if we go there and look at p, we can see that we have an array with 2 items in the array. So that's how we know that the size, the number of rows that were returned is 2. And then we need to basically look inside that array to see what fields are there. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our discussion of how we parse the list data that gets returned. So now we're just seeing what properties are inside the first item in the array. So we just call the properties enum function, and that gives us a list of the fields that were in that first row. Then we create a format string by turning the CRLF delimited list of fields into a pipe delimited format string, and then we call the array dump properties method to dump out the data in the array using this format definition over there. So that gives us text, which is this string over there. So here's the data that was in that array, and then we just add in into our message here the format, which is the actual field names. So now we've constructed this message that we're going to send back to the client as the return value from this JSON callback. And then you can see how we go and do an alert of message. So that's why we now have this message, which was created on the server but is now displayed in the browser. So what we've shown in this extended set of videos are some very powerful methods for working with the list control and performing actions on the list control that you would normally only associate with desktop software. And I think what we've shown here is how the list control is an extremely programmable object that should allow you to create some very rich user interfaces. Thank you very much for watching.